Welcome to the MD Podcast with me, Martin Hartley. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Emagine Consulting. We're a professional services consultancy specialising in the financial services sector.
One of the first things he did was pick up the phone and speak to me and said, listen, I've got a problem with my data. Do you want to leave IT and come to the business, right? And govern and coordinate and bring together all, at first it was client data. And that was another moment for me of taking risk. I've been in IT 22 years, Martin,
Nice.
and now I've got a chance to go to the business. And I thought you won't get this opportunity again, right? So I took it with open arms. Sometimes you've got to believe in yourself. And take that risk.
The Emagine podcast will offer interesting, insightful and frank discussions on the biggest issues facing directors and divisional leaders. The show aims to inspire and educate future leaders by telling the career stories of those of today. I can't wait for today's episode. I'm joined by Howard Bell, who is the UK Head of Banking and Capital Market Solutions for Emagine. So he recently joined Emagine, but prior to that, he spent 32 illustrious years at HSBC, with the last position was the Global Head of Transformation for GBM Business Services, Managing Director level. So welcome to the show, Howard.
Thank you very much, sir. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
It's a sunny day, so it can't be bad.
It definitely is. It definitely is. Spring is upon us. Well, it's actually here, isn't it? But finally, it's been a long winter. So for the listeners out there, obviously, you know the format. It's the past, the present, and the future. We'll dive into Howard's career and take a look at some of the decisions that he made and why, to obviously give back some tips and hints for the future generation of people in our sector aspiring to be a managing director. So Howard, take us back to the very, very beginning. Tell us where you're from and what childhood was like for yourself.
Yeah, I'm from a village called Formby, which is north of Liverpool. And a small village, 35,000 people. And you can't probably tell my Scouse accent at the moment, but sometimes when I'm surrounded by people from Liverpool, I get back into the twang. I guess in the old times, it was mum, dad, me, my brother. My dad was a customs officer, and my mum was a housewife. And because it was a small village, I was in walking distance to the primary school. Then I left primary school, and then I was in walking distance from our secondary comprehensive. So it was a close-knit community. So, but I had a good upbringing. In those days, in the summer holidays, you used to go out at 9 o'clock in the morning, and your mummy said you get back for tea at 6 o'clock, and they wouldn't see you, know where you were, no phones, nothing, and so you came back at 6, and there was no issues with that.
Nice. No. I know it well. My wife's family from the northwest, so not too far from you there. So why technology? Why finance? Where did that passion come from?
When I did my A levels and got relatively good results, so we were choosing which universities, and I'm a mathematician, so I wanted to do maths, but I also wanted to do computing, because my father said that's the future, get into computing. And so I went to De Montfort University in Leicester because they offered a course, mathematics, statistics, and computing. And it was also a 4-year course. There was a sandwich year in the 3rd year, so you could spend a year in industry and probably also get some money to pay off the first 2 years of university as well. So that's why I did that course. I got a relatively good degree out of that. And I was looking at banks, and I was looking at IT shops because my dad really wanted me to go and work for a bank, because back in the old days, banking was where the money is, good career, you had a job for life, etc., etc., etc. So I got a number of offers from a number of banks, but I decided on Midland Bank.
Yep.
Right. So we're going back to 1990. where probably a lot of your listeners weren't even born then. But Midland Bank was based in Sheffield, and because I was from Liverpool, I didn't want to go down south. I wanted to stay up north, close to home, close to my football team, etc. So I chose Midland Bank. It was based in Sheffield, and also it was a good graduate program because they put you in different areas so you could understand more of how the bank is set up to be. Um, and then I kind of did a couple of operations role and moved into technology in the retail bank. And then I guess in 1992, the juggernaut of HSBC came along and they merged with Midland Bank. Um, and then that took us all by shock, really. And so we didn't know what would happen. Um, and then I was really fortunate because one of my friends on the graduate program, he came up to me one night and said, "I've just applied and got a job in Hong Kong." And I said, "Oh my, where's Hong Kong?" Right? And he says, it's over near China, and I'll be there going there for 6 months to learn a system. And I said, "Oh my God, that sounds amazing." Right? Because at that stage, I hadn't got the travel bug
Yeah,
because I was only 23 then. But then I applied and we got it. And six graddies from HSBC UK, you could say, or from Midland Bank that was, went over to Hong Kong for 6 months to learn one of its major banking systems so that we could bring the intelligence back and start building up a London centre of excellence
nice.
to coexist with the Hong Kong one. So I was really fortunate um, to go over to Hong Kong. But to answer your question, it was my dad that was pushing me into the financial sector because in those days it was a very secure profession.
Sensible and sound advice, as always, from most fathers.
Well,
Obviously,
absolutely.
few things to draw out there actually that from your decision making is obviously picking a relevant university degree, and then picking an appropriate graduate program. A lot of obviously people will be going through similar processes at the moment. Um, how influential in your career do you think those two decisions were?
I don't think the university really does matter. Um, it's basically for life lessons, and that's what I've got two teenage daughters, and I'm encouraging them to go to university more for to be independent and to grow as an individual rather than to get a degree. Um, so I wasn't overly concerned that I went to De Montfort University. As I mentioned earlier, it was a sandwich year and it did mathematics and computing, which was one of my huge loves and something that I thought was important to get into. Um, and at that level, there was a number of different graduate programs from banks and from IT shops, Honeywell, Bull, IBM were a couple of companies that I was talking to. But but really, at the end of the day, it was geographically right for me having a headquarters in Sheffield.
Yeah,
And at that stage, I just wanted to stay up north. Um, but it's important, but it's not earth-shattering
yeah.
if you choose the wrong university, or there's so much flexibility with roles at the moment that if you choose um, if the wrong bank as such, that you can quickly course correct.
And just whilst we're on this topic, what's your take on? I've had a few people on the podcast now in senior positions, and they're saying when they're getting profiles through from grads now, CVs for graduate programs, they've already done 2 or 3 years in industry with the number of work placements they've done, and the grades are so competitive that a couple of guys that we had on said that their profiles at entry level now are better than theirs were after 5 years in the bank because it's so competitive. Like, what's your take on that now, on what grads need to do to get into the banking sector?
The working experience is important, but the most important is how you conduct yourself in the interview, right? And if you can hold a conversation with clarity and you're engaging, that for me is really important because even when I was running front office FX systems in my early days in the bank, and we introduced and we interviewed many a graduate, and I was interviewing people from Oxbridge, etc. But it was the ones who were engaging, had a good background, as in a relatively good degree and A levels, but it was their interaction with me that I felt comfortable that they could interact with some traders and some business analysts. So I wouldn't pigeonhole any one of those things about work placement being imperative, great universities being imperative. It's a mixture of those and the ability to have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. The X factor, as they say, not one
Yeah.
but many. Cool. Okay, nice segue there into FX and running that program. Obviously, I know it's one of your favorite and flagship projects. So tell us a bit more about that.
When I came back from Hong Kong, I did a number in those days. You did a number of kind of different roles, which was programmer, senior programmer, business analyst, team lead. And so I worked in a number of different areas up until probably when we came to Canary, HSBC came to Canary Wharf in about 2002. So it was probably about 2003, 2004 that I started working in the FX domain. And in about 2007, we needed to replace our front office FX system. And FX was the bread and butter of our markets business, right? Because it was the cash cow. So we decided that we needed to replace the front office system, and we were starting to work with Murex, and it was a kind of a joint venture with Murex. We helped them to build their FX module, and I don't think it was going too well. And then my manager at the time said, "Would this be something that you'd like to take on to run the implementation for London, I guess?" And what's common throughout my career is, and a message that I would give to all your listeners or viewers is take personal risk, right?
Yep.
There's no one else is going to take that risk for you. And so I did take the risk, say, yeah, I'll do that, knowing that it was going to be a pressurized 6 months or 9 months before the implementation. And I guess one of my fortes at the time was I was very delivery focused, and I could build good, solid, high performing teams. And the relationship with Murex improved, and we got back on track. And we successfully made the implementation, but the adrenaline of going in to work on that Monday morning after go live with your major FX front office system has just gone live. So you're getting the first trained in there, and you hear about sportsmen and adrenaline. There is nothing like fingers crossed and hoping that system was up and running and there was no major issues, because you could have got the Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment in those days off the heads of the business, etc. But listen, that was one of my. I always say that there's a handful of projects or a handful of go lives that you will always remember when you're old and grey, right? And that for me was definitely one of the biggest of my life at the time, and it gave me the confidence to go on and try other different roles. And I remember speaking to a coach at the time, and he says, you don't become confident by looking in a mirror and saying, be confident, be confident, be confident. You become confident by having a large amount of proof that you can actually deliver, right? And so getting lots of deliveries under your belt, gave me the confidence to take even greater risks. And that to me was really important getting that FX implementation by belt, because the global head of FX in the business then said to my manager, that's the guy I want to be the global, I guess in those days, FX IT lead or CIO of FX, because we were kind of globalizing the bank was globalizing in the early 2000s, and rather than just having bespoke a regional setup, it became global. And I was very fortunate that I got very well with the FX head, and so then the world opened to me. I was a global manager, traveling a lot, um, and to me, one of the biggest things that I enjoy is working with people from different cultures, right? And you could say offshoring or nearshoring or best shoring. It doesn't matter to me what you call it, right? It's working with people from other regions, other countries. And when I was kind of the global FX manager, I was working on a budget in those days of $200 million a year, 400 people, a lot of people in Hong Kong, a lot of people in China, a lot of people in the UK, a lot of people in New York. And it opened my eyes to global travel. And I'll be entirely thankful for my 32 years at HSBC because it's enabled me. I think at last count, it was about 15 countries that I've visited or worked in. So yeah, that affects implementation is very close to my heart.
Nice. I mean, it's a great, obviously, project. It's a brilliant story. It's a good one to lead. Just taking two steps back, like obviously you mentioned there were a number of roles prior to that, but what got you into a position to be selected for that role?
So I guess I was team lead in many smaller teams and different areas, but I did have a record of being delivery focused, right? So when you have, as I mentioned before, when you have proof and a good history of delivery, it kind of gives you the confidence to go and speak to your management about, right, I feel I'm ready for the next role, right? I feel I need to grow.
But anywhere near that
And
level, or were they kind of close, or was this a big step?
I think before I got that FX implementation role, I would have been a um, manager of a couple of small systems, right? A couple of small FX option systems in those days. And I was starting to get involved with FX. And the FX business started to know me. And obviously, in those days, when your management said, we need someone in there to fix this problem, Howard's got a good delivery record. What do we think? And you then went to meet a couple of the senior business guys, and if they liked what you said to them, more often than not, you were given the opportunity.
Nice. Okay, then. So then, obviously, you mentioned then that put your name up in lights. What was next? Where did you move to?
So after FX, I've always felt that 3 years in a specific role is enough, right? Because an HSBC is so huge that it's lots of different areas, right? So moving to a different area gives you the opportunity to learn a different skill set, to work with, a new set of people, and work with new stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess for the next few years, I was from leading the FX domain. I then led the credit domain, sales domain, and then towards the towards the end of 2007, 2008, the CIO of the investment bank asked me to run front office production support, as in keep the lights on, keep all the systems running, which again was
How many
daunting.
systems? How many countries we're talking here?
Well, initially with the front office, there's 65 countries, but the amount of systems probably was about 300 or 400, right? But then he asked me to do this, and because we were very siloed in nature, and I did that fairly well. And so then about 18 months later, he said, right, you've done it well for the front office. let's do it for everything, right? So front
Nice.
office, back office, cross products. Um, and again, I said before, and to all your listeners, I would encourage them to take personal risk, right? Um, because I was daunted by the fact of running uh, front office production support. And then when the offer of the back office, it was, oh my God. Now that grew immensely. That was 1,100 systems, 24/7, 65 countries, and the buck stopped with me, right? So I knew when I was asked to do this, I knew that all the different production support teams were in their own silos. I knew that communication wasn't very good. So, I before I got the role, I would put forward my plans to the senior management, and they liked what they saw. So we went along, and we basically had a couple of years to reduce the cost, to look at best practice throughout the organization. Where do we do things well in production, and how can we roll it out to the other areas? Um, we I recognize that the communications wasn't the best, so we created an incident reporting tool, which basically for every incident you put it into the tool, and it automatically sent messages to the business at selected times on a distribution list, which was really good, right? Because they'd never seen this before, and they'd obviously seen different messaging in different areas, and there was no cohesive
Yeah.
um, messaging system. So we did that, and it was a difficult time because part of my remit, Martin, was to take cost out of the organization, and normally your biggest cost is personnel. So to get everyone on board, every one of my managers on board, there was a lot of messaging required and communication required to ensure that they knew that change is good, right? And they shouldn't be threatened by change, because it should allow automation or some of our offshore nearshore centers to do a lot of the work, freeing them up to do more of the value added in those days. And so the messaging was key. And I remember at the time we carpe diem phrase, seize the day, was we ran a communication strategy for all people, which basically said it's a good thing it's coming, so that we can all be one team, one vision, or one team, one dream, we said at the time. And yeah, so it was difficult because it was the first time that I had to, you know, um, had a reduction in force program where we had to let people go. Um, but again, it in the end, we were able to. I think it was something like we were able to reduce 40% of the costs of the environment, and uh, also at the same time as reducing the costs, we were able to reduce all the critical incidents by about 20% as well. So
Nice.
from both value streams
Yeah.
of that program, it worked well. Um,
And what were the numbers like? Like, how many people were you managing? You mentioned your managers there. How many people were you managing? How many were that? What's the matrix numbers like? And how did you operate that landscape? Because all of a sudden you're talking front to back as well across
yeah,
the whole
so
bank.
we probably had. Well, it wasn't across the whole bank; it was across the whole of the investment bank, right?
Yeah.
But there was about 700 people, and we built up. Again, one of the things that I'm proud about, and that I've spent a lot of time over the years, is creating and developing centers of excellence in our offshore centers. And we work with guys in Brazil, and guys in China, and guys in India, and we had best practice in all areas, right? So I I I, I really did enjoy that job. It got me to travel a lot, but there was a lot of pressure with that. But we also had a number of kind of group programs at the time, and they had this concept of 7 by 7. any organization should be 7 wide and 7 deep, right? So we had to, while I was building up this organization, we had a few areas that yeah that we had to abide by, and one of those rules was this 7 by 7 content. But do you know what? It worked, right? And again, it was difficult because some people knew that they were at risk. But again, the messaging, keep on telling people that it's a good thing at the end of the day, and that results will show for themselves was the way we got through it.
Nice. I like the 7 by 7 methodology as well. It's cool. So then
Well,
from there,
I think that's quite common in a lot of organizations, to be honest.
yeah, you don't like above 8's difficult, isn't it? So it kind of makes sense. Um, okay, so we've talked about 2 projects there where it's been, you know, stressful, daunting, but a great result, a great part of your career. And then, so then next you moved to the business side, is that right?
The dark side,
Hey,
the
I wasn't
business
going to
side,
say
yeah.
it.
So I guess when I was the production services lead, I recognized that communication wasn't the best, right? And even bad news, bad news is okay if it's delivered early and you have time to course correct, right? And I learned this lesson at this time. You know, when I was in future years, when I was running programs, and you do get pressure from seniors and sometimes sponsors not to not to say that your program is red, because with
Yeah,
red there's a bad mantle around red. But I was always honest. You've got to be open and you've got to be transparent, Martin, right? And
yeah,
if it is red, it is red. This is what we're doing about it in these certain areas, and we will update you every week on how we're progressing to make this amber and ultimately to green. I
agreed.
have seen, and not only in HSBC, but in other organizations where there is such a reluctance to make programs, red, and it just causes further and further problems down the line. It's expectation management. And so going back to production, I made a conscious decision that um, I would go down to the trading floor every day and speak to the COO, the global markets COO of Europe, and then ultimately the COO of the global COO of markets. And I would give them a state of the nation update
Nice.
verbally. And I used to say, this is the issue. This is what we're dealing with. These are the impacts. I will give you the next update in X amount of time. And they were informed, right? And they felt informed at all times. And do you know what? It's a funny thing actually, because the COO at the time, every time I used to come down in the morning, he used to you could see he used to see me and his head went down because he associated me with bad news. And I had a real problem with this. I said, I can never make this relationship work, right? And I'd always succeeded by making relationships work and stakeholder management. So at one time, I remember saying, "Any chance we can go to one of the side rooms?" And we went in the side room, and I said to this guy, who still remains one of my close friends outside work, I said, "Who gives you the bad news every day that systems are out?" He goes, "You do, Howard Bell." And then I said, "And who fixes it for you?" And he paused and he thought, and he said, "It's you." So I said, "Yes, it's me. So I do bring you bad news, but I tell you what we're doing about it. And in the end, I fix it." And I guess on a sixpence, the whole my whole relationship with that COO, it changed overnight. It wasn't a head down moment and associating Howard Bell with bad news. It was a very much more proactive, strategic relationship. And so much so that the said individual, he moved roles. And he moved into the regulatory portfolio, which was a brand new role. And, we're talking now early teens, 2012, 2013, regulations were the bread and butter. They were the most important
Yeah.
programs of any bank. Um, and one of the first things he did was pick up the phone and speak to me and said, "Listen, I've got a problem with my data. Do you want to leave IT and come to the business, right? And govern and coordinate and bring together all." At first, it was client data, and that was another moment for me taking risk. Right? Oh my God, I've been in IT 22 years, Martin, and now I've
Nice.
got a chance to go to the business. And I thought you won't get this opportunity again,
Yeah.
right? So I took it with open arms, and that I was running data for the reg environment, and ultimately, again, the way the programs operated in those days was very much in their silos, and so each program fixed its own client data, and then the next program probably fixed the same client data or amended that client's data um, again and again and again, right? And when I came across, I couldn't even spell client data. I had no idea about client data, but sometimes you've got to believe in yourself
Yep.
and take that risk. So governance around it, and that taught me that governance is essential. At the right level of governance, the right level of formality, and also making sure that the accountable execs of each division are in that governance forum. You don't want a change person representing an area. You want the guy that runs that area,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so that they can take accountability. So that that client data readiness role for me was very important. It was eye opening, and by bringing everything together away from its silos, we were able to save, I think it was about 13 million in the end. And it wasn't just the money, it was we avoided all the duplication,
Yeah.
right? Of
Exactly.
the data being amended. So I was really, really happy with the move. And we talk about inspirational leaders, and the guy that took me over to the business side, extremely inspirational, because he was the one that taught me that bad news is okay if it's delivered early, and that we have it, then we can put a plan in place. And we always used to have open dialogue, and it was just inspirational working for him.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a few things to pull out there. Obviously, that you just said there as well, being honest, being open, being transparent, and looking things head on. Like you said, that relationship would never have turned on a sixpence if you didn't take him aside and say, "Look, this is the deal. This is how it works." So, I think there's loads of things for the listeners to take from that.
Well,
So, thanks for
well,
sharing
yeah,
that.
I think it just increases the trust,
Yeah,
right?
completely.
That you can mention anything, right? If it's good news or bad news, but you can't just keep saying bad news over and over without a plan, right? You're being paid the bucks to fix things as well, right? So there is bad news. This is what we're going to do about it, and I'm going to report to you on a regular cycle on all these different streams until we actually get it right, and we can move off red to amber or to green status.
Completely. Completely nice. I think the governance angle that you mentioned there is a nice segue to obviously you're joining Imagine. Um, So obviously there were a couple more roles at HSBC, but let's jump to Imagine now. So obviously it's great to have you on board and welcome. First week. Um,
Second day,
second
second
day.
day.
Yeah. So we're not messing around. We thought we'd get you on the podcast straight away. But why have you joined Imagine then? What's your thought process there?
Well, I had a bit of a health scare in 2021, and that was the time that I kind of sat back and said, where do I want to be? And my core values, I remember many years ago, we had kind of a Californian company coming in to help us improve our communication within the organization. and they basically said, "What are your three core values?" And I had to think for over many weeks. And I came up with the three core values of fun, family, and integrity, right? Wherever you go, you've got to have fun, Martin, right? And let's face it, in
Absolutely.
working environments, you spend more of your awake hours with your work colleagues, virtual or not, than you do with your own family. So you've got to enjoy what you do.
Yep.
Family, I'm sure to all of us imperative, especially after coming through the pandemic and all that. So family was really important, and integrity is core to my beliefs. You know, if you're gonna if you say it, you've got to do it, right? And
Completely.
stick to your word. Um, so I had 32 very good years at HSBC, but I wanted to take a different course. So we shook hands July, August last year. Very thankful for all the opportunities they gave me. Um, and I always thought that when I would leave HSBC, I would like to do something different. Uh, and that could be within financial services, or it could be out. I worked for a global organization, 200,000 strong. And so, you know, we've known each other for a long time. I've employed a number of Emagine consultants through the years. They've always been very good and top 10% from a capability perspective. Yeah, and so when we were talking, I said, it's a small company, but then you told me that there was a growth strategy. You were merging with ProData, becoming 4,000 strong, and then I was saying that is a company that I feel I can help from my experience from the financial services, but also I know you work with, or the wider company works with many companies outside of financials, Spotify we've talked about and Philips. Maybe that may give me an opportunity to broaden my horizon. So um, working with you, I hate the phrase "a marriage made in heaven," but it works for me, and hopefully it'll work for you, right? And we'll both hopefully get something out from the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity as well. It shows our client base in the investment banking space and the financial services sector in the UK and mainland Europe that, we can attract excellent delivery focused consultants. And that, integrity being one of your core values is absolutely in the same here. And that's why I love the consulting space, because we're only as good as our last project. Like, we have to deliver. If we don't deliver, there's 100 other competitors that people can bring in and use. So it's all about making sure that, we demonstrate some of the core values and the traits that you've discussed throughout the podcast. So
But
yeah,
you
so
you
we're
also
delighted to have you on board.
you also mentioned, obviously, with assuring, you've got an India body, you've got a Polish organization as well, which you can utilize. And again, that's something that is close to my heart. And I always take great pleasure for my 32 years. I think I even mentioned it in my LinkedIn bio note. I take a lot of pleasure by going to these places and seeing people grow. And with the best shoring opportunities, if you make the individuals in these offshore centers accountable, soup to nuts for the whole of a domain, then it's fantastic. The rewards are unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what solutions we can deliver together for our clients. Right, moving on to the to my favorite part of the show now. It's the quick fire round. So
All right. Okay.
here we go. See how quick on your feet you are. What are the three pieces of advice you would give your younger self or the younger generation coming through now?
I probably have mentioned it earlier, but for me is take risk where you can. Take a risk, because it's good to fail because you learn quickly, right? Not to fail all the time, but don't be scared of failure, right? Don't be scared of taking risks and sometimes failing, because you will know that the next time around you won't make the same mistakes, right? It's even better to learn by other people's mistakes, but always take a risk, right? Don't sit on your laurels and just be happy in the current environment. I always encourage people to look above and beyond. So that's one. Again, integrity is if you're gonna say it, do it, right? Don't go back on your word. And also, as again, my core value, have fun, right? Have fun in what you do. And if you're not enjoying it, do something else. It kind of links with the take risk.
Yeah,
But
completely.
I've been, I've been very fortunate, as I say, to travel the world. I made sure I enjoyed it as well, right?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The amount of time you hear or see of people saying, "Oh, I don't like this, I don't like that," and it's like, well, just do something about it, make a change. Like,
Life is too short, right?
exactly.
Life is,
Yeah,
and and for me, when you have a health scare, it puts everything into perspective, right?
completely. Yeah, nice.
I
Okay,
am
thanks for those.
I am fighting fit now, by the way.
Yeah, I know. We'll put you
I don't want to
put you
worry
for a
any of your
medical.
viewers. No, it's fine.
What three resources do you use for self-development, or would you recommend? Could be books, podcasts, etc., websites, etc.
Uh, when I was going to say when I was growing up, in my early part of my career, I did read The Prince by Machiavelli a number of times because it helps. It's basically about the makeup of tyrants and politicians. It helps you navigate, big organizations and politics within organizations. Do you know what? It's probably out of date now, but that was one that I used frequently. I guess in latter years, even books like the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
Yeah, yeah,
Stephen Covey, um, and that forces you to put things into perspective and to look at, I guess, prioritize important things over urgent and take initiatives. That's always good. Podcasts. I do listen to a lot of sport podcasts, but the one Jake Humphrey has this high performing podcast, which is not all about sport, right? I think
yeah.
recently the guy from lastminute.com was on. So that's good, and sometimes it's lighthearted as well. So I guess there's three things that I would recommend to people.
Nice. And then last but not least, who would be your role model and why?
Well, there you go. So I guess not to show my allegiance to sport, but Sir Kenny Dalglish is probably one of them. But I've got to go for my dad, right? If I can be anything like he was, I'll be happy. I lost him too early, but he was the one that forced me into the financial services, and he was the one that gave me the drive I've got, right? So it
Nice.
couldn't be anyone else.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. Cool. Okay, Howard, it's been a pleasure. Come to the end of the show, but thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights of your career to date.
Pleasure. That's
And
quick. Time
yeah,
flies.
it certainly does when you're having fun. We obviously know that it's not over. It's just getting started with Emagine. So we're really grateful and pleased to have you on board. Obviously, if anyone's listening and wants to pick your brains, or then just reach out to Howard on LinkedIn. It's fine. But thank you. Good luck with Emagine with us, and to the listeners, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the show. And if you've enjoyed it, please share and pass the pod. But don't tell Crouchy's legal team that I said that.